Hey, what's up? Pastor Daniel back with you for video number 3. We have been spending some time taking a deep dive into what relationship looks like in the church. And we've been basing this off of Saul's story in Acts chapter 9 when Saul comes to meet Jesus. Jesus transforms his life, and then Saul goes from being a destroyer of the church, a persecutor of the church, to a man who wants to be a part of the church. And we're talking about what it looks like to form those life-giving, life-saving, deep and abiding relationships that Saul forms in the book of Acts chapter 9, and then through the rest of his life through the book of Acts and in his writings later on in the letters. And so to this point, we've talked about foundations of God-honoring, Christ-centering, life-giving relationships. We've talked about what do those things need to be founded on? What are the pillars of those of that sort of relationship have to be? In the last video, we talked about how to begin to form these sorts of relationships. And if you've hung with me to this point, I appreciate you, because this tells me that you really want to have good, godly, Christ-centered relationships in your life. And so now in video number 3, we're going to bite off something a little bit more difficult, which is what do we do when we fail in relationship, right? And at the end of the last video, I mentioned this, right? Like, even if our relationships are founded on the values I talked about in video number 1. And even if we do a great job of forming solid, God-honoring, Christ-centered relationships, the reality is that we are still flesh and we are still sinners. And at some point in our life, we're going to mess up. And so what do we do when that happens? And I want to bite that off in this video today. And so number 1, I'll just tell you this straight up. Number 1, when we failed in relationship, humbly confess and apologize with no qualifications. And it's that last piece that's most important. Humbly confess and apologize with no qualifications. And I would just add to that, stop with the excuses. Most of us can muster up a grammar school sort of apology when we've hurt someone's feelings, right? I'm sorry that I hurt your feelings. Then what do? 99% of the time we say, I'm sorry I hurt your feelings, and we qualify our apology and deflect blame, right? What we do is we blame shift, right? And so our apology ends up being this: I know I hurt your feelings, but if you wouldn't have done this, then I wouldn't have hurt your feelings. Then what do we really have? We don't have an apology at all, do we? We have blame shifting. We have now blamed the person that we have hurt. We have blamed the hurt on them. I can't tell you how important it is that when you have realized you've come to this place where you have hurt someone, that you must humble yourself. You must rid yourself of circumstances. You must rid yourself of excuses. You must not reason your way out of an apology when you've hurt someone. You must apologize without blame shifting, humbly, kindly, own it. No qualifications and no excuses. And be specific. I am sorry that I hurt your feelings. I know what I said to you the other night. And then be specific about it. I know that was hurtful, and I am so sorry. That's it. So number 1 is humbly confess and apologize with no qualifications, be specific, and stop with the excuses. So that's number 1, right? And I think a lot of us can do number 1, even if we don't do it perfectly well. I think most of us can, because of the heart that God has given us for reconciliation and redemption, I think most of us can do number 1 pretty well. But I think it's numbers 2 and 3 that I'm going to get to now, which are more difficult for us and probably we don't do very often. And so number 2 is this: act to restore the relationship. Act to restore the relationship, right? typically an apology isn't enough. Now, sometimes it might be. Sometimes there may be no way for you to do anything beyond an apology to repair a relationship to its rightful place. However, let me say this. I think that that's rare. I think that there are many, many, many times, in fact, most times, that not only can we offer a humble apology with no qualification, but there's a way in which we can act to right the relationship, right? There's a way we can act to repair a relationship. The word that comes to mind is reparations. Now, I realize that word has a ugly undertone to it because it brings up a dark part of American history, and it even brings up some contemporary political thought. But here's what I want you to do: throw off the historical, throw off the political, and just understand that when we have hurt someone or taken something away from someone wrongfully, what is the right thing to do? Restore, repair, reparations, right? Now, when we think of reparations, I know typically we think of reparations in the form of money, but it won't be that when we're talking about restoring relationship. What it will be is, it will be a humble apology, no qualifications, and then it will be acting to do whatever I need to do to repair the relationship. So the easiest example of this is gossip, right? You say something to someone else that's inappropriate for you to say about another person who's not present, right? That you share an intimate detail of their life, you share a speculation, you share the way you feel about them, you share something that they shared in small group, you share something that they shared with you in confidentiality, right? Go on and on and on and on. Call it gossip, call it slander, whatever you want. And here's a side note. It is still gossip and slander, even if it's true. You do not have the right to share intimate details of someone else's life with another person. And so when you've done something like this, as an example, gossip, slander, broken confidentiality, humbly apologize, no qualifications, no excuses, period, whether it's true, whether what you said is true or false or somewhere in between, right? And then what you need to do is you need to go to the person that you talked to, that you shared the gossip with, right? That you shared the slander with, and say, I said this about that person. It was so wrong of me to share it. I should have never said that about them. I think so highly of them. I have such a great relationship with them. And I just want you to know the things that I said, they were totally wrong. And I'm sorry that I said those things. I think this is a very important part of restoring a relationship, is that we act not just to apologize, but we act to repair. So humbly apologize with no qualification. Number 2, act to restore the relationship. And number 3, verbalize repentance. And I'm gonna put this in 2 ways, right? Verbalize repentance to God and also to man. Okay. Now this gets a tiny bit controversial, but I think once we've talked it through, you'll understand, right? Because we all know, who are believers, that when it comes to sin, we're supposed to confess them to God, right? It gets a little dicey, right? A little controversial when we talk about confessing our sin to man, right? Or repentance to man, right? And here's what I want to say. If you have sinned against another person, absolutely you have to make that right between you and God. God, forgive me, I'm a sinner and I have messed up yet again. Give me the strength to turn from that, Lord, right? That's the act of repentance, verbalizing that to God, super important. But you also have to verbalize that to the person that you've hurt. You got to sit down with them and look them in the eye. And with that humble apology, you have to say, I know I've hurt you, and I know this was a sin, and I know I have wronged you before you and before the Lord. I'm just confessing that sin and saying that I am turning from that sin, and I am asking God to give me the strength to never do this again to you or to anyone else. And this is very, very biblical. You can see it at the end of the book of James chapter 5, I believe, and all over the Bible, where there's this place where we open our heart up to one another. We're honest, we're real, we're confessing, and we're repenting because someone else was injured by the sin that we've committed. So 3 things we do when we've stumbled, when we've messed up, when we've failed in a relationship. Number 1, humbly confess and apologize. No qualification, no excuses, be specific. Number 2, act to restore the relationship. What can I do? What action beyond an apology? What action can I take to restore this relationship? And number 3, verbalize confession and repentance to God and to man when appropriate. And it is when we do those things that we can see repair, healing, restoration, reconciliation happen. Now, quick note as I end this video, even if you follow all 3 of these steps, the relationship may not be immediately restored back to where it was. Oftentimes when we hurt people, right, that extreme bond that we've formed, that extreme trust, it can get broken. Or it can be taken, a sledgehammer could have been taken to it, depending on the degree of sin. And it's going to take time to rebuild that trust, right? Through sharing, through confidentiality, through authenticity, through being real. And so just because you do your part, right, of apologizing, of taking actions to repair the relationship, to verbalizing your confession and your repentance, doesn't mean that that brokenness is going to immediately heal. Sometimes it's going to take time. But these relationships that are lifelong, life-giving, and life-saving, they're worthwhile. So stay at it. All right, that's video number 3 about life-giving, life-saving, lifelong relationships. Video number 4 coming up soon. We're going to be talking about how to relate to non-believers, what our relationship with non-believers looks like, what our role is for non-believers and for people in our lives who have sinned. And then finally, we're going to talk about how to approach and how to deal with a time when somebody has hurt you or sinned against you. That to come shortly. Thanks for being with me on these first 3 videos, and we'll see you soon.